Welcome, come one, come all to the first day of Black History Month 2023. In fairness, I would have made a really great circus performer. I just want to name that, but nobody ever wanted me to be in their Cirque du Soleil troupe. But if you are here to talk about circus performing and how to get into Cirque du Soleil, this is not the session for you. As I just said, they rejected me every time. But if you are here to explore unlearning anti-Blackness, you are in the right place. I have the great honor of being your host, Lindsey T. Jackson. Many people are still coming into the space, so I'm going to banter for another 60 seconds, is what Laura says, as the 500 people who registered for today's course finally find their way here. Course, show, time together, community building. This panel, I just want to pack up and go to Barbados and just sit with them and sup on cocktails while we talk about how to save the world. Laura told me I'm not allowed to do that, but you should be getting excited to hear from them today. Grab your chips, grab your popcorn. You can probably hear T'Challa barking. He's also excited in the background. Get your coffee, get your tea, get your kombucha, and we will get started in just a couple of, turning in from Tulsa. All right, so get your sweet tea. See what I did there? All right, yes, make sure that that is on ice. Oh, look at these faces. So much beauty in this room. It leads me to say diversity is the norm, not the exception. Diversity is the norm, and look upon its beautiful face like a garden. Why do we say I don't see color? Because you would be missing what I'm seeing right now. I see color. Let me tell you, it is beautiful. There's the green light. Welcome to Unlearning Anti-Blackness on this February 1st, 2023, the first day of Black History Month. As a reminder, captions are turned on, they are active. Please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen if you haven't already and enable captions on your screen so that you can see the live captions. We also have our live interpretation provided by the great team at Pro Bono ASL. Right now, Lavender is already leading the way. If you are looking to enhance accessibility within your organizations, we really encourage you to reach out to Pro Bono ASL. They've been an amazing partner, and there's really nothing stopping you from getting going with that right now. If this is your first time joining us in this virtual space, you will notice that when somebody else is beginning to speak, they will say their name first. And that is a way that we make sure that the ASL interpreter is aware that a new voice is now speaking. So you will hear me say, this is Lindsey, each time it comes back, and it is my time to share, and etc. Okay, today we're going to hear a lot of amazing things that are really going to be extremely impactful. They're going to be extremely inspiring, and you're going to want to get to work. And that is why we are so excited to officially today be launching, making accessible to you, our new DEI tech platform, Sojourn DEI. Did Beyonce steal my thunder by launching her new world tour today? She totally did. But that's all right, Beyonce, you do you. I'm gonna do my little queen bee thing too. What? Nailed it. Sojourn allows you to actually move from talking about it, thinking about it, strategizing about it, to actually taking action. We spent the last year building this for you, allies, accomplices, would-be DEI leaders within your organization. Sojourn's going to allow you to quickly come up with your DEI strategy, and then translate that into work paths where we have broken down what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and then built all of the tools for you so that you can just implement. SojournDEI.com. If we show up here next year and you're saying to me still, Lindsey, I just wish I knew what to do and how to do it, I will not have any grace or patience for you because we've literally mapped it out for you right here. The gates are open. I hope to see you on the journey as early as tomorrow. Let us take a deep breath together. Inhaling in. Exhaling out. Let this space be what it is meant to be, and that will be enough. Today on our panel, we are joined by Zee Clarke, Liz Leiba, Shantee Rosado, and let's learn a little bit about them. Liz Leiba is the author of the smash hit, I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. Featured in the New York Times, Forbes, and Time. She's a top voice on LinkedIn. If you're not following her, I encourage you to start following her right now. So that's two things I've given you to do to take action. Get your Sojourn journey going and start following Liz on LinkedIn. She also founded the Black History and Culture Academy. Welcome, Liz Leiba. We're so happy to have you here today. Also on our virtual couch is Zee Clarke. Zee is the founder of Reclaiming Flow. Zee is a mindfulness and breathwork teacher for BIPOC communities. She is teaching us how to reclaim our flow at work and in life. She's the author of the upcoming book, Black People Breathe. Oh, I'm going to take that prompt right now. I'm going to take a deep breath because I'm nervous. I'm so excited that you both are here to do this. And I'm noticing that I'm getting like tongue-tied because I'm just so excited. Also on the virtual couch is Shantee Rosado, Assistant Professor of Afro-Latinx Studies at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She's the co-leader of Insurgent Intersections, Combating Global Anti-Blackness, and a proud member of the Black Latinas No Collective. Welcome, Shantee. Let us delve in because we only have an hour and it's not going to be enough. It never is enough. As a reminder for everybody, if you have to leave at the top of the hour before we get to question and answers, please do what you need to do, but we will be staying here to really get into some questions with our panel. My first question for us today, I was thinking about this morning while out walking T'Challa. At what point, as a little Black girl growing up, did you start to think that you were beautiful? Shantee, at what point, as a little Black girl, Latinx girl, did you go, oh, I'm beautiful and it's okay that I'm beautiful?
I would say, I don't know that I had that feeling as a little girl. You know, I think that that's something that developed over time. I definitely, my mother would always tell me that I was beautiful, but she also didn't really have the language for describing the racism that I experienced in Puerto Rico, in the US. And so it was you're beautiful, but without kind of acknowledging how the world was telling me that I wasn't beautiful. So I have to say that, yeah, that's something that came later, probably college.
Yeah, this is Lindsey. Zee, I see you head nodding. Can you relate to that?
This is Zee, and I can definitely relate. You asked that question, and my immediate reaction was, I didn't. I never did. I thought I was ugly. I hated my hair. I honestly, believing that I was beautiful came much later in life because of how I was treated, because of what I looked like. So I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Washington, D.C., but I went to a predominantly white private school in the suburbs. And so not only was I the only Black person, but I also felt like I was the only low income, poor person. And so, yeah, never felt beautiful. And it's only recently that I even stopped straightening my hair because in order to get a job, I started my career in financial services. So my appear in New York City a long time ago, Black don't crack. That's why you can't tell how old I am, but many decades years ago.
She's 77.
Yeah, it was not okay to have natural hair in New York City. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, yeah. This is Lindsey. Elizabeth, what about you? Similar, different?
This is Liz, and much like Z, I had the same reaction of, I don't know if I've ever experienced that. Up until recently, I was one evening, maybe like 2 weeks ago, looking in the mirror and telling myself, you're beautiful. I think as Black women, a lot of the time our parents would tell us, maybe our mom would, but the world around us did not reflect that. So it's difficult to really see yourself as beautiful where you don't have enough evidence other than your mom saying it, because our moms tell us we're great, we're wonderful, we're amazing. I mean, that's just what moms do. But I think I knew that I was seeking validation of that beauty. And a lot of that was in some of the relationships that I pursued, or some of the things that I did that I knew were not healthy, because I wanted to feel beautiful. But I don't think I necessarily ever had that idea in my mind of, oh, you're beautiful, because it wasn't something even that was really emphasized. I think they said, you got to be smart, you got to get good grades, you need to get a good job, but never anything about beauty. And then when you go to the makeup counter and you can't find a makeup, and makeup is supposed to enhance your beauty, but you can't find one that matches your shade, or you don't feel that you are beautiful because everything that you do is always met with some kind of, oh, wow, you cut your hair, or, oh, wow, your hair is long and then it was short, and then, oh, you have braids. It seems as though it becomes more of an anomaly, or something that's othered the things that are things that should be beautiful. So it doesn't give you the opportunity to really sit in the sense of, oh, I'm beautiful. A lot of us that grew up in these Black neighborhoods, that was the least of your concerns, being beautiful. As a matter of fact, you wanted to not be beautiful. You wanted to not attract negative attention. You never had a baby doll that looked like you. And that's probably for a lot of us the first time that we are able to say, oh, Barbie is beautiful, but Barbie didn't look like us. So yeah, I, like the other panelists, I don't think that that has ever been something that occurred to me, that I was beautiful.
This is Lindsey. As we enter into this conversation today, I wanted to not start in the theoretical. Take a look at this panel. These are some of the most beautiful women you're going to see today. They're telling you that at the age of 77, they're still wondering if they
I'm 78. This is Liz.
Okay.
I'm 78.
We all know I just celebrated my 89th birthday. I'm still waiting for all of your gifts to arrive. I see there's 213 people. I'll wait. Right? And we're questioning still if our lips are beautiful, if the shade of our melanation is beautiful and acceptable, if our hair is beautiful. They're still trying to didn't pass legislation at the end of the year that would allow the four of us to show up at work wearing our hair and not be discriminated against this. This is not theoretical. We're talking about things that have impacted us since we were little children. Black and brown individuals began experiencing 5 instances of racialized violence from the age of 5 per day. Per day, 5. I've got 3 children, 2 of them identify as Black. Per day, they're 10 and 8. Do the math, right? So think about that when you're wondering why somebody is triggered and they're going, out at you. How many times did that camel get, right? Elizabeth, so can you break it down for us? When we're talking about anti-Blackness, what does that mean? And what is its historic origin?
I've thought about this so much because for myself, being an immigrant, growing up in London and coming here from UK, I didn't really have a good sense of what Blackness really even was as an identity. I had always been in predominantly white areas in growing up in London, and there was probably only 3 Black children in my grade in my primary school. So I didn't really have a good sense of in British culture. A lot of the first generation, because I was born in London, our cultures, we have the Jamaican culture, which we really don't relate to because we are not from the island. And some of us had never even visited the island. I never had visited Jamaica. So that was like a secondhand culture. So we really adopt that British culture because we don't have anything else to relate to. So I think coming here, I did have like a rude awakening that Blackness was something that was actually, it was a target. It was something to be afraid. It was something that you needed to understand in order for you to navigate the world. And I was not used to any of that because I had attacks or verbal assaults on myself even in London as a child, but I really didn't internalize what that meant. They used to sell gollywogs, and if anyone
Mm.
knows what a gollywog is, it's like a black doll. It looks like a minstrel. It's very, very black. It has like red lips. It has curly wool hair. And they used to sell those in the stores. And I even know family members that had them. And it was almost seen as, well, that's just a natural depiction of what a black baby doll is. So they would just buy it for their children. So I didn't even really understand the origins of anti-Blackness and racism until I got to the United States. So I was 12. And from a historical perspective, anti-Blackness is really rooted in capitalism, is rooted in the idea that, and we know this from historians, sociologists that have studied this, that if you're going to make someone chattel, you can't give them a rich history. You can't give them a continent that's glorious. You can't say they were astronomers and that they were griots and they had gold and wealth and they were sitting on thrones. You have to say that someone was an animal. You have to say that you taking them and bringing them to another country was helping them and saving them from, being a savage. So really that was rooted in the idea that we need labor to build a country. And who do we get? In this case, them seeing an African continent where they were open to trade, they weren't saying, get out of here, leave. So you have a door open. I was listening to a video, John Henrik Clarke, about the diary of Christopher Columbus, and even when he got to the shores of America, saying, in his diary, like, hey, these indigenous people, Native Americans, what they called them, and Indians, because they didn't even know that they were in America. They thought they were in India. So that just shows you what you're dealing with here. They're very friendly, like he's speculating in his diary, like they seem like they would be easy to take over their land. And they're bringing gold. Why are they're not bringing more gold? I wonder where the mines are. So this is what his thought process was. So if you think about the fact that the indigenous land that was stolen, it needed to be built up, obviously, and they didn't have the resources with the manpower, and the Indian indigenous folk that were here refused to be conquered. I used to work for the Seminole tribe in South Florida, in Hollywood, and they literally are called unconquered. They refused. They ran into the Everglades. I was the editor of their newspaper for 4 years. And I was always fascinated by that because Black escaped enslaved Africans joined with them and they lived in the Everglades. They refused to be conquered. So you're talking about people that didn't say willingly, come take my land from me and I'll just go on a reservation. That happened by force. That happened with genocide. That happened with guns to their heads. So now we have to find another source of labor. We're going to Africa and they're not turning us away. But we obviously, if we're saying we're Christians, we need to find a way to justify what we're doing. Because if we put a person in shackles and kidnap them, because that's what they would have to do in order for someone to come to another country and build it, If someone sailed to our shores and said, we need your kids to fight in the Ukraine, we would say no. So they had to come up with something, and race was their card. They played the race card, literally. What they tell us we're doing, they played that card. They are animals. They are savages. They're not fit for anything but working. They're dumb. We can rape, we can kill, we can torture. They can't get married. They're not allowed to read because this person is not a real person. They look like a human being, but they're actually an animal. So that is the origin of, I think sometimes people get it in their head. They're like, well, I'm not a bad person because I don't see color. I don't feel like Black people are inferior. I don't treat people differently. This is not about that. This is about an internalized system of saying, we need labor. You're going to be on the bottom. And now we'll put other people on top of you that have proximity to us, but they're not you. So it's in their best interest to subjugate you too. And then anti-Blackness really becomes a way of life. And I think that's why people become very surprised when they say, oh, well, Black people participate in anti-Blackness. Of course, because Black people are a part of a system where the closer you are in proximity to whiteness, the more privilege you have. And if it's, hey, step on you, that if a person is that way inclined, that they're a bad person, they will kill someone that's innocent, like a Tyree Nichols, or they will not let you get a promotion because if it's you or them, it needs to be them. So they will stop you from getting that promotion. And that's literally the historical nature of anti-Blackness. It is really about creating hierarchy where everyone wants to be at the top, but only 1% of the people are ever going to get there. And everybody else fights each other for whatever scraps are left at the bottom.
This is
That's
Lindsey. Wow. Take a moment and just breathe all of that in. Notice the parts of your body that wants to run from that knowledge. Notice the fuzziness in the head. Notice the rapid beating of the chest. Notice the churning in the gut of our shared history. It's in our DNA, right? We're learning more and more about generational trauma and how we pass that down. These stories live in our bodies. All 218 of us in this moment, those who are going to watch this recording later, we are all connected to this intentional structure that was built, as Elizabeth said, to prioritize a few at the top and to ensure that the rest were fighting against one another to get the scraps from the table. Of course, they don't want to teach this in Florida, because what would knowledge do? Ooh, what would knowledge do? Which is also why we had to make sure that the slaves were not educated. I was just listening to a documentary and they were talking about Thomas Jefferson, who would write, about the justification for his slaves, but those who had been bred into chattel slavery, about how they were not ever going to sit down and read Euclid or other Greek masters. Wow, not ever adding in the footnotes. By the by, we haven't allowed them to touch books or engage with any writing materials because an educated. But let's just unpack that word chattel for a moment. This is really important. Make sure you write this down. When we talk about slavery, sometimes what I hear in classrooms is people go, yeah, but Lindsey, they had slaves in other places before the United States of America. And I say, good job, you nailed it. Now tell me what chattel slavery is. And they go, chattel slavery is a uniquely American thing because we like to supersize things, where we began to breed slaves. We began to breed people into the institution of slavery. So we conveniently wrote some laws to say that the slave line would not go through the paternal line, meaning that you would not be born into slavery, but instead that it would go through the maternal line, meaning that you would be born into slavery. And so then we started to breed Black women to breed slaves. If you're asking why is it that we're talking about in that hierarchy, why Black women are even further down on that hierarchy than Black men, introduce the language of misogynoir, the intersection between racism and sexism, where we can have an institution that was built for Black women, their children to be bred as slaves. There's the chattel slavery part, like cattle. Think about it, don't run from it. Shantee, so Elizabeth said something interesting there about even within the context of our own ethnicity, remembering that there is only one human race, although we all seem to have accepted the idea that there are multiple human races. There's not, there's a human race, all of us coming from the origin of this animal's existence in Africa. But within our culture, we can still practice anti-Blackness. And so how does colorism, how does shadeism, Shantee, show up in the relationship between being Black, being Latinx, being Asian? How does that also overlap with the system?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. This is Shantee. It's really interesting that that both of y'all were bringing up exactly all the points that I have written here in response to this question. So I was like, yes, 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 yes. I wanted to actually read the exact quote from Jefferson, which is what you referenced, and I have it right here. So Thomas Jefferson, right? Principal author of the Declaration of Independence, was a Enlightenment period thinker as well. Speaking of Black people, Jefferson stated in the notes on the state of Virginia, quote, comparing them by their faculties of memory, reason, and imagination, it appears to me that in memory they are equal to the whites, in reason much inferior, as I think one could scarcely be found capable of tracing and comprehending the investigations of Euclid, and that in imagination they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous. And
this is Lindsey. So if that's the case, y'all better stop listening to Black music, buying Black clothes, eating Black food, enjoying, arithmetic and the pyramids, everything. Remembering that the pyramids had existed 200 years before most Western thought. So we're taking that off the table. If you can't enjoy Black people, then you better stop enjoying Black culture. I digress. Sorry, back to you, Shantee.
This is Shantee, no worries. So I feel like if we're going to talk about colorism, anti-Blackness in, societies that exist within the US but have their own particular cultures, we also have to go back to this idea of anti-Blackness as rooted in defining whiteness as well, right? So whiteness would not exist without this construction of Blackness as inferior, subhuman, deficient. So really, in order to tackle anti-Blackness, we need to dismantle whiteness. And I feel like that's really where the conversation always takes me. In terms of colorism, one thing that people forget is that colorism only exists because racism exists, and colorism includes white supremacy and includes anti-Blackness. Some people try to frame it as if it's like this unique thing that happens within communities of color that's separate from like the Black-white racism that we see in the US. It is not. Those all coexist, those all inform each other, and they are all rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, all of them. So when I do research on Puerto Ricans and Dominicans who, are folks who span what in the US we would deem as the white-Black spectrum, right? People who are mixed between white and Black for the most part. Then what I find is that usually the same language of whiteness shows up in how people talk about race. These, ideas of colorblindness, we don't see race, we're all the same. In Latin America, the favorite thing for folks to say is we're all mixed race. Which is convenient because Black people still continue to be at the lower rung of society, just by happenstance. And so people love saying that they're mixed race, and that gets used as kind of a way of saying, oh, Latino people are somewhere in between white and Black people in the US. No, because there are Black Latinos there are white Latinos, there are indigenous Latinos, there are Asian Latinos. All of us exist, right? And all of us exist in racialized bodies that do not just allow, most of us to just say, oh yeah, I'm just Latino. No, you exist in a racialized body. You are read as a racialized being. You are categorized and resources are allocated to you accordingly, right? Regardless of your ethnicity. So I feel like colorism can sometimes serve as an out for people to kind of say like, oh, this is a unique thing that happens within communities of color and even within African-American culture, right? As something that happens within communities of color. It is still rooted in the same system, right? As long as we can divide, it's easier to conquer. And so colorism is really just how white supremacy and anti-Blackness shows up within communities of color. And it also exists between, white people and people of color as well. So yeah, it's more similar. As I tell people, racism and anti-Blackness and white supremacy are more similar than they are different across the Americas. And just because it's a different geographical space doesn't mean that we weren't affected by slavery, that Black people are, treated better or anything like that. It's really the same story with a slightly different framing, if you will.
Yes, yes, yes. This is Lindsey. Zee, as Shantee was sharing that, what was coming up was, it makes me want to sometimes run from my body. And, as I asked that question at the beginning, thinking about as a little Black girl, feeling as though everything was wrong with me from the outside in. I think a lot of Black women, Black men, Black folk can feel as though they need to leave their body in some way. And so this energy that we talk about the angry Black woman or the defensive Black man, from a very young age, it's an energy that gets created to protect yourself in a hostile world. Remembering that your kindergarten teacher could have been hostile. Your middle school teacher could have been, your doctor could have been hostile. How do I not run from my body?
This is Zee. How do you not run from your body? I teach mindfulness and breath work. Why? Because it's so important to pay attention, to be mindful around what's happening in your body, especially when you experience challenges. And maybe you're not experiencing them yourself, but you might be witnessing others suffering. And so the thing is that if you run from it, if you ignore it, whether you're ignoring challenging emotions or the things that are happening in your body as a result, I like to say the issues are in the tissues. When something bad happens, you might feel like you got punched in the stomach or that lump in your throat or your shoulders go up. But if you suppress those emotions, if you suppress what's actually going on, it's going to snowball effect. And then suddenly, one random day, you're going to blow up at somebody and they did nothing wrong. Like, let me give you an example. So I play the violin and I was living in Colorado and I played violin at a violin vigil for Elijah McClain. Elijah McClain was a 23-year-old Black man, a violinist who used to play violin for the kittens, okay, at the animal shelter. And he was walking home from, he was walking home from the store and he was unalived by the police. And the, paramedics put ketamine, and I'm not going to go into it. My point is that I went to a violin vigil, not a protest. I played violin with other violinists and the police came with their riot gear and then we were attacked because we were playing violin, okay? And then, so terrible situation. I went to work on Monday, okay? I went to work on Monday and I yelled at a white man. I did. He did nothing wrong, but what I took with me on Monday morning was what happened over the weekend, was the trauma of being attacked by all of these police in uniform with all these weapons, and all I had was my violin and this body. And so it was so important for me during that period to pay attention to my body. And I caught myself because I did have a mindfulness practice at that point. So, you get triggered, and then I paused and I apologized. And I told my colleague why I was triggered because of what happened. But it was by paying attention to my body, by using mindfulness to become aware, oh, this is what's happening inside. Let me take some deep breaths to calm myself, calm my nervous system so that I can interact. And I think it's really important for folks on this call here to just be aware that there are a lot of things that are happening to your colleagues outside of the workplace that they arrive with. And not just trauma of what happened over the weekend, like in my case, but epigenetics is real. Family inherited trauma. So what do I mean? A study was done that with mice, and the mice, every time that there was a cherry blossom scent, they had an electric shock. So they knew every time they're like stressed out, right? Because they're like, oh, cherry blossom, we're going to get shocked. Those mice had children. Those children were never shocked. But every time there was a cherry blossom scent, they too went into fight or flight mode. Those mice had children. 3 generations for the mice, maybe 14 generations for worms. They've even studied humans now, Holocaust survivors, those descendants, right? Descendants of folks that were around in 9/11. So this is what we arrive with. And that's why it's so important for us as people of color to pay attention to our bodies. Yes, a somatic approach, but also as an ally to notice your own body when you are interacting, right? For example, if somebody calls you out because perhaps you committed unintentionally a microaggression, I invite you to pay attention to your body and how you're reacting, because you might get on the defensive. You might go into fight or flight. Oh, I'm being attacked. They just called me a racist, right? And then that causes all sorts of things. So if all of us were to pay attention to our bodies and to breathe, I think we would have a much more peaceful and productive society.
Yes, yes, this is Lindsey. And yet, Zee, it's, going back, as Elizabeth was saying, to so much the roots of capitalism and all of these systems. In a capitalistic model, being disconnected from your body is almost demanded,
Yes.
right? Because if you start to notice how fatigued you are on the line, if you start to notice how your body is decomposing, right? Doing the same task over and over and over and over and over again, you might build a labor movement and say, this 18-hour shift ain't working so much for me, right? Or the clickety clack, clack, clack on this computer all day, every day, on my cell phone, right? It's not working for me. So we stay habitually disconnected from our bodies, even fearful from our bodies. Working in the health space, so much, asking people, so if I took the coffee away, would you even be able to stay awake? That fatigue that we just medicate ourselves. And everybody was like, I can see everybody on the call go with this. Put your coffee down. I saw you. You're sprung. Yes, everybody's like, she is looking at my Zoom screen. But Shantee, you said something about how we cannot disconnect the creation of the idea of anti-Blackness from the creation of the idea of white-bodied superiority. So if I'm on the call today and I have been cultured in white-bodiedness, moving through the world in a white body, which, as you said, is defined by our system, is the response, should I now be walking around feeling shame about my body? Is that the space that I should go to?
I would say no. So there's a lot of emotions that kind of perpetuate anti-Blackness and white supremacy. I'll talk about a couple. One is denial. Actually, in one of the posts about this event, someone said that anti-Blackness doesn't exist, which I thought was a great example of that. Example of that. Then we have shame, right? And that can show up in a number of different ways. So I want to call it, since we are all involved in this system, there is the shame of being Black, right? The shame associated with that. There's the kind of what people call linked fate which is like the shame that other people of color or even Black people have of other Black people's behaviors, quote unquote. That's another form of shame. And then there's the shame that white people experience by just the naming of whiteness, right? I'm very conscious that when I say whiteness, white supremacy in class, that white students are feeling a certain way, right? That doesn't just go over their heads, right? Something happens in the body. There's also fear. I feel like fear gets talked about a lot, right? But oftentimes people talk about the fear of Black bodies, the fear of Black people, but they don't talk about the fear that white people have of losing their white identity. And I think that is really critical. So when we talk about dismantling whiteness, essentially when whiteness it's just a category of power, right? It's not infused with like, it has a culture, but it's not the same, right, as other cultures. So if we wanted to dismantle it, what do white people have left? What do you have left if we dismantle whiteness? Who are you if you do not have whiteness? If you are not white, who are you? I feel like that's an important question. So that's that fear. And then there's guilt. Guilt is my favorite one to talk about because this is a super common emotion among white people who are, trying to work through anti-Blackness. But I feel like it's so unproductive, and not to use that language of like productivity, but just like it paralyzes people sometimes, it keeps them from engaging in actions that would actually make the world better and keeps them stuck in the mindset of me and how I feel. So feel the guilt, experience the guilt, and then what else? What will you do after the guilt? Because if you do nothing, then that guilt had no purpose other than to appease yourself, other than to make yourself feel some sort of relief, right? So yeah, I'll leave it there.
This is Lindsey. Shantee, may I have permission to call you in? Can you choose another word besides paralyzed or paralysis?
Yes, absolutely. It keeps people kind of stuck in, it keeps people from, stuck is the word, right? And I apologize for using that term. As I was saying it, I realized how it was problematic. So it keeps people from committing actions that would actually work to eliminate racism.
Yes. So thank you. This is Lindsey. Thank you for the permission to call you in. And everybody know, did you see that Shantee just managed to model what she was describing? I asked for permission to call her in. She's noticed it. She thought about it. If there was a moment of like, oh my God, guilt, shame, 223 people, I'm meant to be the expert. She moved through it like that. She came up with an action. That's exactly what she's talking about. Don't get stuck in the feeling, move to the action. Elizabeth, like 28 head nods on what Shantee was saying. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, and I think Zee might have had something she wanted to interject, and then I can jump in after. Did you have something, Zee?
I did want to just have one quick addition, kind of an add-on, because Shantee was talking about feeling stuck in an emotion, right? Whatever that emotion might be. And I just wanted to offer a mindfulness framework whenever you feel a challenging emotion, whichever of those that she listed that you feel. It is a framework called RAIN. RAIN is an acronym. R stands for recognize. Recognize how you're feeling and name the emotion. Shantee did a great job of naming a bunch of emotions. You need to figure out what are you, name it. And when you name the emotion, it allows a certain separation because the ego then starts judging yourself and it just goes down a spiral. So R, recognize how you're feeling, name the emotion. A is for allow. Allow the emotion to be there. Sometimes we get mad at ourselves for feeling that way. I grew up in a household where you just sweep everything under the rug and keep it moving. You got to go to work. You got to go to school. Ain't nobody got time for that. But actually, that's bad for our health. It builds up over time, as we discussed earlier. So A is for allow. I is for investigate. Investigate, where are you feeling this in the body? Where am I feeling the shame in my body? Is it in my heart? Is it in my belly? Identify, name the body part. And then N in RAIN is for nurture. Nurture yourself. What can you do to feel better? Something as simple as placing a hand on your heart and taking deep breaths can be a great way to nurture yourself. But maybe you need to call a friend or a family member. Maybe you need to be alone. Maybe you need to go for a walk. We are all different, but try to identify what will make me feel better. And by taking the time to process those challenging emotions, then you will be your best self because you would have actually taken the time to take care of yourself.
This is Lindsey. Zee, what if the thing that comes up in my head is what would make me feel better is hurting their feelings back?
I think that is a fight or flight sort of reaction. This is I think that's a fight or flight reaction. And I invite folks to think about, would that actually make you feel better? Nelson Mandela has a quote about resentment. Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping that your enemy dies.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Elizabeth, what's coming up for you?
Whew. I'm getting so many gems. I just want to get in the audience and just listen because this is so good. And I think everything that's been said, and this is Liz, this is Elizabeth, everything that has been said is resonating so deeply with me, because I think at the root of when we're thinking of anti-Blackness, we have to recognize and we have to acknowledge that whiteness and Blackness are a fabrication. They're literally a narrative that was created. There is no biological basis for race at all. Biologically, it's hereditary features that have happened due to evolution, because we know that the first Black, and I think I saw Lisa Hurley, mitochondrial Eve, we know that the first Black human that we could trace was in Africa. And that's where all of our origins are. But what has happened is we've bought into a story that says, a framework that says whiteness originates, civilization originates in Europe. Men dominate women, children beneath that. And then you have every other structure of shade of person. And this was literally created. It was written down like, this is how we're going to structure. These are the skull shapes. And I don't want to get into all of the nitty gritty of the details, because at this point, the most important thing to understand is, in order for us to reimagine what that looks like, we would have to be as intentional as someone that sat down and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a structure where white male landholders are at the top and everyone else is at the bottom. And that includes my wife, that includes my daughters, that includes everyone I come into contact with. And that structure and hierarchy is going to keep me at the very pinnacle of that structure of capitalism. And at that point, when it becomes more about leveraging your power and control, it becomes difficult to interrogate that whiteness, because whiteness in itself really doesn't have any meaning without Blackness. Toni Morrison said it, who are you if you don't have your race? Mark Lamont Hill asked somebody in an interview, what do you like about white culture? What do you like about being white? And the person couldn't name anything. And I could think of like 10 things right now that I love about being Black. So it lets you know that in many ways, whiteness is defined by Blackness. So it would make sense that you would be offended by the idea that we want to have our own identity, because there has become, I think, this, it's almost like a abusive relationship. If you think about what an abusive relationship looks like, if you're with someone that is an abuser, maybe a narcissist or a sociopath in domestic violence, which I've experienced that. So that's why I think a lot of this is triggering for me. That person now starts to define their ineptitude based on what they're projecting onto you. So there becomes this sense of, well, you have to listen to what this person is saying, because if you're in a household with them, raising children with them, your fate is linked to theirs, and they're telling you what your reality is. Because if they're hurting you and you're saying, well, this hurts me when you do this, and I want to leave, I need to get away from someone that's hurting me, well, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt your children. No one is going to believe you. I'm not doing anything to you. You're imagining these things. What did I do? And if I did do something, you made me do it. So this whole toxic abusive relationship comes from a person now who has defined your reality for you. And when you try to question that reality, is telling you that is not what's happening. And I think it becomes very challenging for someone to give up if that person is a pillar of the community outside, right? And we see that a lot when we see people that are in these domestic violence situations that escalate into maybe a wife being killed. We've seen that on the news recently. Oh, this person, we never would have thought that person would do that. They're a pillar of the community. They're a pastor. They're a lawyer. They're this, they're that. And I think that's what whiteness has done, is created almost this hero, this person that is beyond reproach. There isn't an ethnicity or a culture ascribed to that. It's really a mythology or an idea. If we think about who it might look like, maybe it looks like John Wayne. Maybe it looks like, I don't know, a cowboy with a hat on. Whatever that picture is in your mind that says you're beyond reproach. If someone challenges that idea, if someone challenges manifest destiny or Christopher Columbus, or the fact that you conquered the world and then you got in a plane and helped to defend World War II, whatever it is, that clip from Nicole Hannah-Jones where you even have Mike Wallace, or I can't even remember who the interviewer was. Well, how can you criticize the greatest generation? Because in your mind, in someone's mind, when you're criticizing their behavior, you're criticizing them. It's just like an abuser. I could never abuse. I wouldn't do that. You're imagining this. So people have literally bought so far into this construct of whiteness that really letting that go, it goes back to what Shantee said. Who are you without it? You really wouldn't have anything without it, because you've built all your castles on sand, and it's created on something that is a mythology. And I think it's difficult for people to let go of that. But I think sometimes I challenge people to think about, if you think it's difficult for you, imagine living in my body for a day. The fight or flight, the cognitive dissonance for me, because this is not what I want for myself. You've written a play and you want me to act in it. And I know that the character I'm playing is not me, but you want me to do it, and it's against my will. So the idea that people are saying is too hard to deconstruct, where was the energy when you said, when 400 years ago, sailing across the Atlantic to tell people, oh, you have slavery here too. Why are you here, sir? You shouldn't even be here. How do you know what we have here? You have this energy to conquer and commit genocide across the globe, but not the energy to deconstruct it. And then to say it wasn't my fault because I wasn't there. I wasn't there either, sir or ma'am. I wasn't there, but I'm still dealing with the consequences. And I think that's a part of the conversation that needs to happen. In order for this to be deconstructed, I think it's really great for us to have the conversations, because the conversation needs to be had. But the action would have to take part for that person to really, I was on a call earlier, and a white woman, she said, I rebuke white supremacy and what whiteness as a construct is, because it is not serving me and it's not serving my children. At least by saying that, understanding that whiteness as a construct, it hurts her too. Because I don't understand how white women are 50% and women in general are 55% of the population. And we're celebrating that we have 10% leadership in corporate America. I'm like, how dare us celebrate that? But this whiteness as a construct has made it that that's a celebration, because white men have said, well, a white woman is inferior to me. And then everyone else, you fall in line below that. So I really feel as though we have to deconstruct whiteness, or we will always have anti-Blackness.
Wow, this is Lindsey. Wow, I'm so happy I am in the audience because I'm just absorbing this here. Oh, Elizabeth, there were so many things there. I think one, the notion when you truly internalize it that this system is not benefiting any of us. It's not benefiting any of us. This is not Shantee and Lindsey and Zee and Elizabeth's problem to go out and solve because it's hurting us. It is everybody on this call's opportunity to solve because you are also a victim of this system, right? Even if you are a white-bodied man on this call today, the moment you come out as gay, the moment you are disabled, the moment you step outside the boundaries, welcome to the existence that the rest of us have been experiencing. And you know that. That's why you can use potentially that privilege to not come out, to not share your truth. That's the thing about anti-Blackness, is that it was a tool to say we have to make sure somebody can't hide from the bottom of the caste system. Somebody cannot have the option to choose whether or not to disclose or not disclose. Melanin was an inescapable feature. You could see it at a distance. And so much has been built upon that. And yet, as we begin to move into the space of really taking some of your questions from the community here, one of the things I've heard recently that I'm going to start saying again and again and again is that if you want to call yourself an ally in this work, if you want to call yourself an accomplice in this work, if you really want to move from talk to action, the way that Elizabeth is saying, right? We have receipts to show the sales of these bodies. We have receipts to show the building of the ship that then moved and sailed, right? 1492, we sailed the ocean blue. I learned that in school in Pittsburgh, that's for sure, right? We have receipts to show the investment that was made into building this system, and it cost money, right? I want to see the receipts that justify your allyship. That means that it cost you. It cost you money. It cost you time. It cost you effort. It cost you in some way. That's the beginning of dismantling your power and privilege. When you have to make a decision that is going to cost you in order to build the society that we are all starting to envision. Does that make sense? Show me an indication that's right for your body that you get it. If it's not costing you anything, you're not doing the work. Let's hear some questions from our community. Laura, do you want to drop those for me? Or inviting people to come off of mute and ask your questions directly to our great panelists.
This is Zee. So while we're waiting, something that sparked in when you said it, that like your receipt and the cost. You know, one thing, the idea that I had is around linking bonuses, like compensation of leaders in offices, like at companies, to the employee satisfaction rates of the people of color that work there. Because back to like costs, right? You have performance-based bonuses, right? And the performance is always financial. But what if that bonus, your compensation as a leader, was tied to how the Black and brown folks are doing at your company? And I feel like actions would be different if that was, that's a financial cost.
Oof, oof. Hannah Boehm said, right? I bet if there was, this is Lindsey, if there was accountability tied to whether or not you're taking your DEI work seriously, you're taking your inclusive culture building seriously, right? But that would take some serious, right? We're going to put our money literally where our DEI statement is. Yeah. Yeah. Richard H. asked, if there will be a recording people can share. Yes, Richard H. There will be a recording. You can find it. Once you create your freemium accounts on Sojourn, you're going to be able to find all of our past unlearning sessions there, along with all of the materials, all of these great books that people have been naming. Shantee, Zee, Elizabeth have been naming references to everything. All of that stuff gets compiled into a resource that you can take to your next DEI committee meeting, your next dinner party. Please be like me, where I'm like, let us discuss the most recent. And they're like, oh God, just pour the wine. I'm like, I brought both, a discussion topic and good wine. Elisa Jones asked, my question is, will have follow-up discussion groups, and how can we stay updated on those besides turning on notifications for your organization's LinkedIn? Thank you, Jalisa. Absolutely. Follow us on LinkedIn. You can, well, if you want to just see images of Black joy, you can follow me at Lindsey T. Jackson on Instagram. Please follow Elizabeth, Zee, and Shantee across their platforms, as well as let's all get our hands on these books. That's one action that we can take. And let's all really take everything that we've been talking about here and think about the systems that we want to build in our lives and in our organizations. Talk is great, communal healing is great, but as Elizabeth said, it's the actions. It's the action to build that boat. It's the action to build that plantation. It's the action to write it into law. Now we need to take the action to do the reverse of all of those things. It's that hard and that simple.
Hey, is it possible to jump in?
Yes, Karen. Welcome.
I would just like to say personally to Shantee and Elizabeth, thank you for calling out whiteness. I'm a wealthy CIS white person who has spent the last few years learning what I was not taught. But I find it useful when talking to other white people, particularly white males like me, to not talk about anti-Blackness or racism, but talk about whiteness and talk about our privilege and how, you know, this is your experience. Have you ever thought about this is somebody else's experience? So and like you said, anti-Blackness does not exist without whiteness. And so that's, I just really love the focus. This whole thing has been great. But yeah, that's what I try and do with my white friends. It's not, I don't try and point out the racism. I try and point out their privilege and get them to see. And it's a struggle. I live in at the furthest western tip of North Carolina. My last two Congress people were Mark Meadows and Madison Cawthorn. So I try, but that's the conversation I try and have. And I appreciate the time.
Greg, I have a question for you, which is, as a self-identified white male, and I'm going to have Tiffany Mendez on deck. Greg, how can you share for other white men, maybe even especially cis white men joining the call? How have you navigated that? What allowed you to open yourself up to this new knowledge as opposed to moving to defensiveness and closed?
Well, I think the real question is, how did I not see it for so long? So I grew up in Indianapolis in a neighborhood that we moved into in 1969. 6 months later, a Black family moved down the street. Within 5 years, my neighborhood was 80% Black. I went to a mixed race school, so I grew up, but I lived in a Black neighborhood, but I was racist. My family was racist. There were things I didn't see. There were beliefs I held that I just didn't see. And I don't know, I bought this property 20 years ago, and had I seen the world today the way 20 years ago, I never would have bought this place. I mean, my wife passed away. I live on a mountain. I have my dream home, but it's in a place I don't want to be. So, but over the last 5 years, And particularly since my wife died, I just started doing reading and diving in. I read Right Fragility. It led me into some other things. I got on Twitter. I started following some Black women. I started reading more. And it just, I don't know, it was right there and I never saw it. We're taught not to see what is clearly in front of our eyes. So, anyway, and I spent the last 2 days watching the first 2 episodes of 1619. I mean, I read the book, but to see that in the second episode and y'all talking about Black maternity and the abuse of Black women and using them for breeding, and that whole episode was about that. I mean, can we not, and it's whiteness is a creation of white men, powerful men with all the money. And if we don't fix it, nobody's going to fix it. And it's not fair to put it on y'all either. So anyway, that's all I got to say.
It was good stuff to say. Greg, you also just made a new friend. Jaleesa Jones is reaching out, connecting. This is exactly why we build community. She said, I'm in your neck of the woods. It sounds like you all are getting together. Go have drinks. Tell us all about it. Tiffany
Awesome.
Melendez.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, so my name is Andrea. There is a topic that I have been in discussions with other people, and it's come up a lot. And it has to do with affirmative action and merit-based applications. And I feel like it comes up in a lot of different institutions, academic, career. And it's this argument about how you shouldn't have affirmative action because it takes away opportunities from people that deserve it, quote unquote, or that actually have the skills for it. And I feel like it's a very complicated issue because when you look at it, you have to understand that a lot of the merit that people get is because of the resources and the privileges that they get from growing up. So I just want to know what you guys think about that.
Yes, thank you, Tiffany. I'm just going to mirror back your question. Tiffany is asking about affirmative action and some of the nuances. You're not Tiffany. You had tell me I'm reading what it was. You're Tiffany. Tell me your name again, not Tiffany.
I'm Andrea.
Andrea is asking about affirmative action and the nuances around its applications, the idea that it somehow allows us to incentivize people who are not worthy of that role over other people who have the merit or are worthy or have more skills over that role. Oh, Shantee, Zee, and Elizabeth, who wants to dig into that one?
I'm gonna make Shantee do it.
Oh,
That's
this
an
would be like
idea.
a tag. Who wants to tag in first?
So,
Shantee,
yeah, this is Shantee. So I was actually going to talk a little bit about affirmative action.
I was gonna
but
say I know you have your resources already together, so I
got my notes. I gotta come with the notes, otherwise it all goes out of the head. I feel like the thing that kind of comes up for me is naming why why the dismantling of affirmative action is happening, right? And how is it happening? So that takes me back to the 14th Amendment, which, was implemented during the post-abolition period in the US to protect free Black people, right? Newly freed Black people. And so that amendment says that we should have equal protection of the law. What has happened since the civil rights era, where obviously we're still experiencing the backlash to the civil rights era and all the progress that was made during that era, what happened since then is that equal protection of the law has been warped to argue that white people are not gaining the sorts of access that they need to different institutions. Essentially the reverse racism argument, right? And so when you see these cases of affirmative action, what you're actually seeing is people essentially warping, changing, repurposing something that was meant to protect Black people and make them equal to others in this society, to then protect white people and give them more benefits, more access, more privilege. So it's really I mean, I can't think of a better word than perverse, because that is just what is coming to my mind, is the fact that that amendment is being used in the way that it's being used. I think this idea of deservingness is very interesting, but at the end of the day, it's like, why do we have affirmative action to begin with? Because Reconstruction didn't actually work. Because Reconstruction did not actually work. Because Black people were freed, but not actually freed. Because Black people were freed, but kept in slavery in other ways, right? So we're still seeing the effects of that. And so I feel like it's kind of an argument that needs to be dealt with historically, paying attention to the history of this country, as opposed to just taking it as like an issue that's happening today, divorced of all that.
This is Lindsey. I would add to that what is so powerful about our system, our caste system, is its intentionality to put historically marginalized people against one another. And so if you look at some of the cases that are being pushed to the Supreme Court right now, it is, if you boil it down, you're seeing that there's a narrative coming out of traditionally Asian communities and Black and Brown communities, and it's actually pitting them against one another, as opposed to talking about how there is a system that prioritizes whiteness and everybody else under that. And so, as always, you know, Hamilton, the musical, let's not talk about the person, let's talk about the musical, right? Follow the money, right? Follow the money. And you see that there are conservative groups that are very focused on trying to dismantle affirmative action in general, but putting the face of it, right, is Asian children in school in Harvard. So continually dividing oppressed people is one way that we keep this system. And we look at Baker's Rebellion. It was about, hey, the indentured servants who had come over in serfism and those who had been brought here in slavery and then born into chattel slavery, they were getting together. How do we make sure that we divide them? Okay, and so everybody needs to go and do your research on the model minority myth and how that then gets tied to the myth of meritocracy within our country. All of these things scaffold on top of one another, but as our friend Greg said, the more we read about it, the more we go, oh, this checker game is intense, right? But if we keep following the money, follow how all of these things are still built to prioritize whiteness, we keep in our focus what it is that we are working towards.
This is Zee. I wanted to add one comment, which is how this manifests in everyday life for a Black person. So I have not one, but 2 Harvard degrees, okay? And many times in my life, people have assumed or said to my face that the reason I was in the position that I was in was because of affirmative action. So even as a freshman at Harvard, it was like, oh yeah, you're like, you only got in because you're Black, right? And in the workplace, I can't tell you how many times when I first started a new company, people will say to me, oh, are you the new diversity hire? And it's as if that's the reason. But the thing is, what people don't realize is with affirmative action, we are qualified. In fact, we are more than qualified, right? And so call it whatever you want to call it, but like, we deserve to be here. And the stereotypes, they are harmful. And the comments, the oh my God, how do you speak so well? These microaggressions, they are harmful. And it's a direct result of all the history. But I just want everybody to know, this isn't just history. This is today.
Yes, this is something. I love when people say, oh my God, you speak so well. How did you get here? I say, bitch, I started college when I was 15 years old. I've been smart. I'm going to be smart for the rest of my life, right? I'm so sorry that we need to wrap up. My Barbadian grandmother is turning on her grave that I would be bound by these white constructs of time and not allow this conversation to just continue to unfold until the jerk chicken has disappeared. Aaron, please send us your question and email and we will get it answered. As always, community, it is such an honor to be here in this space with you, to hold one another. Let us send our energy out from this space and start planting our own seeds under trees that we will not sit under. We will not eat their fruit, but we sure as hell are gonna plant some powerful trees that the generations that come after us will benefit from. We'll see you next month when we are talking about, Laura, what are we talking about?
We are talking about, for Women's History Month, Unlearning Hatred of Women.
Ooh, well, so
So-
pick up the conversation where we just left off. With all my love to you. Thank you, Elizabeth, Shantee, and Zee. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.